Hi, thanks for returning for the second installment of Follet. Before we go any further, we need to talk. Follet is an explicit adult novel that, in parts, is not safe for work or children by any stretch of the imagination. Every chapter features supernatural beings and music and sex and pie. So if you're not comfortable listening to someone read you a story about any of these subjects, please stop the video now and find a different video to watch and enjoy. I'd like to suggest any of the songs of Steve Messenger that you can find on YouTube or on their Facebook page, or you can enjoy one of my other novels, but this one would not be for you. However, if you're willing to give it a try, I can only say, in the words of a very wise woman, this is going to be a bumpy ride. So sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy. Here we go. And then he walked through the wall and into her dream. Follet looked over to the bed. Kate was curled up. Sleeping on her left side, her blonde hair fell softly over her shoulder, just long enough to touch the collar of her gray t-shirt. Blanket kicked off the bed. The white sheet lay bunched at her hip. Follet looked around the room. 4 beige walls with a faded print of some nameless mountain hanging over the dresser. But then the room began to change, as though a mist began to cover the substance of the small space, the objects in the room, and then the room itself became fainter, and another reality asserted itself. The dream room was larger. The floor was concrete. And when he looked up, Follet saw a metal roof supported by girders. Follet looked back down to the bed and saw Kate arise, wearing an unbuttoned blue Castrol work shirt and white cotton panties. She smiled at him and crossed the room. Follet now saw the room of her dream as a garage. Kate walked slowly, swinging her hips, to a red toolbox from which she pulled a heavy chrome socket wrench. She looked at him and let the head of the wrench push aside her shirt, so that he could see her hardening nipple. She moved the wrench down over her belly and then further so that it pressed between her legs. She rubbed herself with the hard steel and then turned. She opened the long hood of the car that had become the dream. It was black with shining chrome, a 1971 Mustang Boss 351. Kate reached in and set the wrench on a bolt and strained to turn it. She spread her legs to give her more leverage, and Follet enjoyed watching her muscles strain. She finished, carefully closed the hood, and turned back to Follet. "Let's fire this girl up." Her pink tongue moistened her lips. She tossed the wrench in the general direction of the toolbox and walked to the driver's door, fishing a key out of the pocket of her shirt. She opened the door and slid into the seat, turned the key, and stood on the accelerator. The Cleveland V8 roared. She took her foot off the gas, but let the engine run. She got out of the car, walked around to the front, and sat on the hood. I just love that rumble," Kate whispered. She slipped out of her work shirt and let it fall on the hood behind her. The Mustang's throbbing engine sounded low and throaty and sent its vibrations up Kate's body, making her small, soft breasts tremble. She held out her arms to him, and Follet walked to her. She spread her legs so that he could stand close to her, and when he came close, Follet realized that he was naked. She leaned forward and kissed his stomach and reached for his cock with her right hand. Her fingers closed around his hardening shaft, and she pulled him closer, close enough so that she could reach around him and cradle his ass cheek in her palm. She opened her mouth to kiss his belly again and ran her warm, wet tongue over him so that he was bathed in her spit. She tightened her grip on his ass and moved her mouth lower. He placed his right hand on the crown of her head, letting his fingers wrap themselves in her silky hair. She moved her mouth down to him then, pushing her lips over the head of his penis and flicking at its tip with her tongue, almost like a breeze. She took her head from him then and stood up slowly into his embrace. He lowered his mouth to hers and kissed her slowly. As their lips discovered each other, he moved his hands across her back and then down and slid his fingers under the elastic of her panties to cup her ass. He pulled her to him, and their kisses deepened. He slid his hands around to her hips and crouched, slipping off her panties and revealing the delicate golden hair that shadowed her moans. She sat back down on the hood of the rumbling car, and Follet laid her down. He bent over her, and she raised her legs to wrap them around him just at his waist. Supporting himself with his left hand, he leaned over and bent his mouth to meet hers. He broke that kiss and moved his mouth to her neck. He licked her there, tasting the salty sweat that was her. He moved to her ear and softly nibbled on her lobe, sucking on it as he held it gently between his teeth. He moved his mouth down to the base of her neck and let his lips caress her between her collarbones. He let his right hand move to hold her left breast, and he moved his mouth to suck on her erect nipple. He squeezed and sucked and let his tongue flick at the fleshy nub just before his mouth darted to the side of her breast. He licked her soft skin and opened his mouth a little over the slick wetness of her and sucked. As he increased the pressure of his suction, pulling her into his mouth, she moaned at the pleasure. He marked her with a bruise just outside her areola. Follet felt her hand reach for him, grasping and pulling him closer. He reached down to grab himself to guide his cock. He pushed his hardness from where her fleshy lips began at the base of her moans, down her fleshy slit, through a warm wetness that coated him, down to the tender space between cunt and anus, rubbing her there. He moved his hand to his mouth and spit on his fingertips and moved his hand down again between her legs. He found her tight little sphincter and let his wet middle finger circle and press gently against her there. He moved his hand back to clasp his cock and guide himself into her. He placed the meaty head of his dick between her soft, wet lips and pushed enough just to press on her, but not enough to push inside. She reached down to grab his ass, to push him into her. As he slipped inside her, he could feel the pounding engine moving her hips in a counter rhythm to his. She locked her ankles behind his back and pushed her hips against him to fill herself up with him. Follet pushed and retreated, and Kate followed his lead. And then she changed the rhythm of their meeting. He moved his mouth again to hers and the fingers of his right hand to press against her anus. She gasped at his touch, and the small cries that they both made pushed them harder and faster into each other. He whispered to her of his joy, his need, and her power over him. And he pushed into her, and she surrounded him. He felt himself rush into her, and he felt her squeeze him, kneading him until he fell against her. And then at the edge of his vision, the mist began to return as her dream ended. Follet found himself in front of her, looking down at her, seeing her writhe in the afterglow of their coupling. The walls of the garage faded and became the beige wallboard of the motel room. The hood of the Mustang faded and was the bed again. And on the bed, Kate wore the gray t-shirt and white panties, but the sheet had been kicked to the floor, and her hand was between her legs. Follet turned and walked through the wall and found himself on the sidewalk in front of room 5. He turned and went back to room 10. People may work from sun to sun, but the work of an incubus is never done.